Those who are interested in uniting at all costs will ironically divide a movement by keeping out those they see as dividers. Welcome, Wild Ones. This is Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. Quick episode this week, solo episode. I want to tell you about an article I wrote for Eco Integrity Alliance's Substack, which really encourage you to subscribe to. That's ecointegrityalliance.substack.com. The article is called The Environmental Activists Paradox: Unite or Divide. And it's a little bit controversial in that I give one specific example that I'll get into in a second. I don't name any names, but I think it helps to bring some of these high-level concepts into the real world. So when I refer to the activist paradox, unite or divide, what does that mean? Well, I sort of define an advocate as somebody who, by necessity, must divide through opinion, saying this is not enough in terms of environmental stuff. This is not enough environmental protection. We have to do this. Otherwise, we're not going to move forward. Versus the organizer, which is we got to bring enough people together on a common cause in order to make any dent in this issue. And the truth of the matter is, I believe both are crucial. And personally, I engage in both, and Eco Integrity Alliance engages in both, as do a lot of our allies. But there is this paradox because sometimes it's like, well, wait a second. Dividing as an advocate makes it harder to unite people as an organizer, and uniting people as an organizer sometimes makes it hard to have a stance that is strong enough to do anything worthwhile. So basically, that's what I get into in the article. And so again, I summarize the advocate's role as dividing, the organizer's role as uniting. And a paradox is something that seems to operate at cross purposes, but in truth, maybe is a part of the greater whole. So there's the concept of light and shadow, yin and yang, which I have an article as well, funny enough, called the yin yang of environmental organizing or something like that. And that one goes into that paradox as well. So basically the concept of something called integral thinking is you don't pick either or, right? Sometimes you realize that both pieces are important part of the puzzle, but how do we make sense of this particular paradox of uniting and dividing? So I talk about dividing first and how there are downsides to dividing. There's no question, right? It's like you're always fighting. It feels like a constant conflict. And a lot of people just don't want to hang out with you, right? They're just like, oh, this person who's bringing this into the situation. And even those who might agree are just like, oh, the conflict. People don't really like conflict. And so Eco Integrity Alliance is considered divisive because we accord to certain principles. And I will read the quote that is foundational to our guiding principles at Eco Integrity Alliance. This is from David Brower, who lived from 1912 to 2000. He revitalized the Sierra Club in the 60s. He was somebody who at first would give away land for other land, and then he realized that was a terrible, terrible mistake. So this was his quote: "Compromise is often necessary, but it ought not to originate with environmental leaders. Our role is to hold fast to what we believe is right, to fight for it, to find allies, and to adduce all possible arguments for our cause. If we cannot find enough vigor in us or our friends to win, then let someone else propose the compromise, which we must then work hard to coax our way. We thus become a nucleus around which activists can build and function." That is gospel as far as I'm concerned. And it's funny how few environmental groups follow that, but Eco Integrity Alliance does. And I'll tell you what, a lot of other movements know to follow that. So in terms of advocacy, isn't that a worthwhile stance to take? And what's funny is even at Eco Integrity Alliance, we're not even that extreme. Here's our divisiveness. hey, public lands, which are our last best ecosystems that have the legal and cultural framework for protection, how about we don't do industrial extraction on those for, say, 4% of timber and 2% of beef, right? We don't need to do that there. So it's like, what? That's the craziest. No, that's basic, in my opinion, that's basic advocacy. But that is considered to be a dividing role. So, okay, we'll just accept that divides people. And yeah, we're blacklisted by elected officials, government agencies, a lot of these well-funded working lands NGOs, and anti-environmental media does not like the fact that we stick to our guns with some basic premises that were come up with, in the 1960s by somebody who revitalized the environmental movement. Like, seems like worth doing, but okay, we're dividing people. So how do we deal with the fact that we also need to unite people? We have to unite. And I do think some of us, and maybe it can be argued in some cases, Eco Integrity Alliance, or certainly myself, have focused too much on the role of the dividing advocate for whatever reason, and not enough on uniting. Now, most of my work is organizing and uniting. So bringing other voices together, raising their voices, boosting their signal, because I'm just a guy, right? I deliberately chose not to be a scientist, not to be, somebody with the status background. I'm somebody who can put words together, can make sense of stuff sometimes, and then tries to communicate that. And I've got enough grit to just stand out there in the storm. So that's been my role, and that's the role of uniting. But realizing, there are some people who don't want to work with me and Eco Integrity Alliance because we do the dividing. So it's like, how do we make sense of this? So there is an example that I guess I'm not going to go into too much because I write about it in the article, and it's a delicate topic, so I don't want to say the wrong thing or say anything inaccurately. But long story short, there is somebody who, so if we consider the concept of a uniter and a divider, right? Somebody who's focused entirely on dividing, and then somebody who might be focused entirely on uniting. So there is somebody in the local community who is a uniter, and they were putting on an event. And while Eco Integrity Alliance was not invited or our allies, there was somebody from a larger environmental organization that does a lot of good work to present on this, what at the time was the largest logging project in Colorado history, which now has been supplanted. And now we're talking about 4 of these huge mega logging projects that apply nationally, not just locally. And anyway, so this individual, the staffer from the larger environmental organization, was invited by the uniter to present on that topic. But they weren't really working on it. They had signed on to comments that were written by one of our allies. And so I was asked to be a part of it to fill in some gaps, even though the presentation was very good, and to tie it into some action, because we were organizing a campaign around that. And so we were actually going to be leading another hike to the area to get people out there, to get some attention to it, get people connected to the land. So it was really nice to be a part of something like that. And at the end of that event, even though that was the only piece that I recall that was directly related to stuff that was going on locally and that people could actually plug into in terms of organizing, that was I thought a great example of how maybe a uniter who focuses a bit on, let's say, Enviro 101 issues, doesn't really get into the nitty gritty stuff or the real controversial stuff. A larger organization that maybe wasn't focused on this issue, but acknowledged that it was a concern and willing to use their status to point that out. And then a local grassroots advocate organization that was working on this stuff on the ground to get people involved and engaged. So I was like, this is a great example of what we could be doing in Colorado and across the country. So I was actually psyched about it. I let the Uniter know, hey, next year, I'd love to be more officially a part of things, whether presenting or even helping to organize the event. I've done a lot of that. I'm like, cool. This person came on our hike and was engaged with some of that, asked to be a part of some of the stuff that we were doing with planning the hike, got some footage there, and they did one social media post. So their reach is through social media, which we really appreciated and thanked them for. And then the hike happened. A bunch of people showed up. No media again. We were getting no media attention. So the issue with this is a complete media blackout, and it's continued to this day. I think there was one mention in one media outlet other than our opinion pieces. So we really needed the help of this Uniter to get the word out, but they stepped away after that and made some efforts to re-engage with them, inviting them on podcasts, seeing if there's ways we could sync up, and it was sort of like either no responses or we'll look into that. Then finally, the expansion of this logging stuff with even bigger logging project, they said they'd look into it. They didn't. And I was like, well, I guess that's that. I guess they're not really interested in engaging on these issues on the ground and the most controversial pieces. And I guess they're not doing that event again because I never heard anything. Then I did find out that they were doing the event again. I contacted them and said, hey, could Eco Integrity Alliance or some of our allies be there so we can talk about these worsening threats? And they said, no, and there's actually no room even for a table. And I was like, that's weird. And as I go into very cautiously in my article here, I may have not properly addressed the situation. I tried my best to just figure out what was going on there. In the end, let's just say that I realized that I could have addressed it better. And at the same time, there was no way to actually address it because it seemed from the start that, yes, this Uniter was really focused on avoiding the most controversial components of what was going on. And they did seemingly intentionally not just leave me out or Eco Integrity Alliance, but anyone connected with the more controversial issues that really needed and still need engagement on and a media blackout. And they decided to do an environmental event that was all about uniting without really any of the dividing. And ironically, dividing our local movement by saying we're not being a part of anything that's really controversial. So I kind of had asked about that. I'm like, are you just trying to avoid the controversial stuff? Saying basically like I could at least understand and make sense of this. They kind of just got offended that I even asked that, but it seems pretty clear that that's what's going on. So again, totally accept that I could have done a better job of engaging in it. I'm not sure it would have made any difference. And so all I have to go with, unless more information comes along, is that those who are interested in uniting at all costs will ironically divide a movement by keeping out those they see as dividers. So that's weird, right? And of course, many who are dividers are incapable of uniting and will really harm ability for people to come together. So that's why the Eco Integrity Alliance, we say, here's our position on public lands. For instance, no extraction on public lands, no logging, grazing, mining, drilling. We believe public land should be biodiversity, watershed, climate, refugia, but you don't have to believe that. As long as you are not actively advocating for more industrial extraction on public lands, we're going to help you get out your message. You're welcome to be a part of what we're doing. We're really upfront about our stance and that others don't have to have it. So that's kind of the way I've tried to do the organizing. And so in regards to how do we engage with those who will shy away from any dividing in terms of the controversy, I don't think there is a way to really engage with them. I think you can invite them in, but they don't want to be a part of something that is what they see divisive. And maybe there is some cognitive dissonance where they're questioning their own role. And it reminds them that maybe what they're doing is not the most effective thing, and maybe they're taking an easy route, because it is easy to say, hey, everyone, don't we want to just generically protect the environment? People are like, yeah. And then if you're like, hey, y'all, we're going to have to get into some controversial stuff that even is controversial inside the environmental movement, not a lot of people want to do that. So basically what I came to a conclusion of using this concept of integral thinking, so integrating the different pieces and trying to make sense of it. What can an advocate and organizer glean from all this? So again, I encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to please read the article. I do go more in depth with all the details. I'm just giving a gloss over of it, basically just to get you to read the article. But I know some people will listen to the podcast and not read the article. So let me just say what my general conclusion is, /was, /will be. So I think that the way to address the activist paradox of uniting and dividing is we have to embrace both. And I think we have to start by dividing. And this is unfortunate because it limits our numbers, but it's kind of like a quality over quantity. So we have to say, hey, y'all, this is our stance on public lands. And if people can't even handle engaging with people who are doing that, they're not people worth uniting anyway. They're never going to be anything other than just generically saying, yay, environment. And that's been the environmental movement for the last 50 years. And, you know, the early environmental movement, I think, was a bit more understanding of the need to divide and unite. But I think it's a clear failure. We tried that experiment. Can't we try this other version? So first we split off by saying, this is our strong stance. Oh, but we're going to lose all these people. I think we have to, because I don't like burning bridges. But the idea I've been bringing up is like, what is the value in a bridge to nowhere? And I would find at this point, there is no value. I've learned the only way to really work with those who are just all about uniting and really think dividing is not necessary very often. It doesn't really even matter how you communicate to them. You know, arguably there are better ways to do it. Maybe my personality or the personality of those who tend to be more in the advocate realm can be off-putting. But I believe the truth is that there's not much we can do with those folks. So let's focus on those who are into you. Like you're dating, you're like, well, I want to be able to be attractive to that group of people. It's like, it's probably never going to happen. Focus on those who are into you and move that forward. Not that I want to date you all. I just want to organize folks. So that, I think, is the way we move forward. First we divide, and then with the folks who are willing to stick around, or at least tolerate, all right, we don't agree 100%, but let's move forward, organize those folks instead of the other way around, which is just unite people in general and then push out all those who are actually pushing the envelope and making the necessary statements and doing the necessary actions to move things actually forward. We tried that experiment. I'm not saying it was a wrong thing to try the uniting at all costs experiment, but right now uniting is, let's join up with the extractors to advocate for logging public lands or grazing public lands or doing some drilling and mining that's maybe a little more sustainable on public lands. It's like, that's not our job. That is uniting at the cost of the whole purpose of why we're even doing this work. So anyway, that's just my opinion. That's what Eco Integrity Alliance and our member groups tend to follow. This is philosophical, I understand, and maybe not everyone's interested in this. And yet I do think it is a worthwhile discussion. It's something that keeps coming up. It can apply to even other activist movements, and you can actually see other more successful activist movements do employ this. They just intrinsically know. And somehow the environmental movement has become just all uniting and no dividing. And how is that working? Can't we at this point in time say it's been a dismal failure and it's time to try something else? So moving forward with things, I'm always trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong. Like my goal is to advance a cause. And so if there's something that I or Eco Integrity Alliance is doing ineffectively, I want to fix that. So I want to be open to mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. I make constant daily, probably hourly, minutely mistakes, but I try to learn from it best I can. We all have ego. We all have blinders. We all have our shadow. But I feel like in this piece, I really tried to be vulnerable and open myself up to things I might have done wrong. And sometimes you just have to realize that feedback is not always good faith. And that there are some people who are just never going to be on board with what you're doing. And in the environmental field, it's really tricky because there are a lot of those who want to believe that they're saviors of the environment, including all of us. And then the idea that, well, maybe they're not, that's really off-putting to them. And they hate hearing that. They hate even thinking about it. And they hate seeing or being around those who remind them of it. So it's like, all right, let's give them a break. They want to do their thing over there. It's never worked. I don't think there's any evidence that it ever will work. So let's, the rest of us, continue to, say, build our own pirate ship or whatever and separate from the armada. This isn't a good analogy because the pirate ships plunder the armada. All right, I have to work on my analogies for that one. But read the article. I've thought it out a lot better in the article. Check that out on our Substack. And again, that piece is entitled, as I scroll to the top because I forget what it's called, The Environmental Activist Paradox, Unite or Divide. Please check it out on Substack, ecointegrityalliance.substack.com. Really appreciate your engagement, and I want to hear from you all. What do you think is the best way to deal with uniting and dividing? Does this divide first and then unite make sense? What should we divide over? What do we do with those who are interested in uniting at all costs and want to push away, ironically divide the movement because they don't want to deal with the dividers? So yeah, that's what I got. Thanks everyone. Praise the trees.